Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Asshole. The word echoed in his head, but Robert Mitchell's expression didn't change at all as he continued to sip his glass of whiskey. His eyes glued to the television in the corner of the bar as if it were the most interesting thing in the world. He didn't turn around, and there was no reaction to indicate that he'd heard the voice behind him. Mr. Robert Mitchell. The voice sounded again, this time closer. He felt a hand on his shoulder. My name is Marcus Reynolds, and I was hired to find you. Do you want to keep that hand? Robert asked softly, still not taking his eyes off the TV screen. He could feel the hand immediately retract from his shoulder. Mr. Mitchell, we need to talk. Robert sighed and slowly turned around, looking the stranger squarely in the eye for the first time. 30-something, suited and booted, looks like a young partner in a law firm. But he's clearly not right for the job. Too nervous, too anxious. His lack of real private detective should be calm and firm. You've got the wrong guy, Robert said calmly. My name is Alan Parker. No, Marcus insisted, with a smug smile. You're Robert Mitchell from Chicago. Evaporated 2 years and 4 months ago, leaving behind a wife, a daughter, and a whole lot of problems. Robert looked around. There were only a few locals in the bar, too far away to hear their conversation. Tom the bartender is preoccupied with a baseball game. No one is interested in them. What do you want? He asked coldly. Take you home. Robert smiled, and it was a cold, humorless smile. You don't understand. I'm already home. This is my home. Your wife wants you back. Yes. There was a dangerous glint in Robert's eyes. Well, let her come to me in person instead of sending a private detective who can't even hold a gun. Marcus showed an uneasy expression and subconsciously touched his jacket as if to confirm something. I'm unarmed, Mr. Mitchell. I'm not here to threaten you. Good. That's safer for you. Robert took a sip of whiskey. Tell your employer she's gotten all she can out of me. This conversation ends here. He stood up, threw down a few bills, and prepared to leave. Wait, Marcus said sharply. At least hear me out. Come. There are new developments. Robert stopped in his tracks, a flicker of doubt on his face. What new developments? Sit down first. Let me buy you a drink, and then we'll talk it over. It started with an email that shouldn't exist. Robert Mitchell, CFO of one of Chicago's most successful construction companies, is sitting in his office, ready to call it a day. It was late in the day, and a cold October wind blew against the windows of his office. The downstairs parking lot was half empty, with only a few cars left for employees who worked late like him. It's a regular part of life. Coming home too early meant dealing with Diane's icy expressions and dwindling conversations. Their marriage had cooled over the past few years and had become a routine. 23 years of marriage, a daughter, Emma, now in college, and a valuable lake house. From the outside, everything looks perfect, but the insides have long since rotted. He was about to close his computer when a notification of a new email popped up. The sender is the company's IT department. The topic is simple: system maintenance, recovered files. Robert wanted to ignore it, but professional habit made him click on the email anyway. Mr. Mitchell, in a recent system backup, we restored some files that you may need. Since these files come from your account but are stored in a non-standard location, the system does not automatically recover them. You can find these documents in the attachment. IT department. Robert frowned. He doesn't remember losing any documents. Out of curiosity, he clicked on the attachment. This is an encrypted zip file. What's the password? He tried a few common passwords, none of which were correct. Then he realized that it was probably an email sent to the wrong person. But just as he was about to delete the email, he subconsciously typed in Diane's birthday. The file is unlocked. Inside were backups of several emails, all sent from his wife's personal email address. Robert wasn't sure why these would be on the company's servers unless Diane had ever used his computer to log into her email. It sounds reasonable that Diane would occasionally come to the office for events and may have checked the mail in his office. The contents of the first email made his blood curdle. Dear James, last night was wonderful. I can't stop thinking about the feel of your hands on me. Robert is traveling to New York again next week on business, and we can have 3 full days. I've come up with an excuse. Let's just say it's our organization's annual fundraiser that requires overtime to prepare. Can't wait to see you. Love always, Diane. Robert's hands began to shake. James Coleman, Diane's colleague at that nonprofit. Married with 2 children. Robert had met him a couple times at company charity events. He was always overly attentive to Diane, and that subtle, teasing gaze had made Robert uncomfortable, but he chose to trust his wife. James was about 45, 5 years younger than Diane, well-maintained and carried himself with the kind of confidence that characterized successful men. His wife, Sarah, is a nurse practitioner at a local hospital, and their 2 children are in high school. On the surface, they were a model family in the community. But now Robert realizes it was just an illusion. He continued to read the other emails, each one stabbing him in the heart like a knife. The affair had been going on for at least 6 months. The details of their dates, how they met in his and Diane's bed while Robert was away on business, and how they laughed at Robert's workaholic habits. The last time, I almost thought he was going to get us, James wrote in an email. He came back early, but luckily I heard the garage door. I slipped out the back door while you pretended to have just gotten out of the shower. It's sad that he's so easily fooled. Diane's reply angered Robert even more. He was too busy with his numbers and meetings to pay any attention to me. We haven't had real sex in months. He always came home exhausted and worked on weekends. You've given me what he never gave me: attention, passion, and excitement. I feel alive again. They even discussed future plans. The last email was 3 months ago. James, we need to be careful. Emma came home last weekend and asked me why you keep calling me. I made up an excuse that it was about work, but she didn't seem convinced. I don't want her to know about us, especially not before I'm ready to tell Robert. When the time is right, I'll talk to him about divorce. But now is not the time. He just got that huge bonus, and we need to make sure I get my fair share when the estate is divided. My attorney said that if we wait until the end of the year, I can claim half of my bonus and stock in the divorce. That's a difference of millions of dollars. When the time comes, we'll be together. You can leave Sarah, I'll leave Robert, and we can start a new life. Imagine with Robert's money, we could buy a beach house and live the life we've always dreamed of. Love you, D. Robert shut down his computer, his thoughts a jumble. Anger, betrayal, disgust, a mix of emotions. Their marriage had been in name only for a long time, and he knew it by heart. But the feeling of being so nakedly betrayed, of knowing that he was being used as an ATM, of knowing that his wife and her lover were laughing at him, these sent a sharp wave of nausea through him. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment mistake. It was a calculated betrayal, a complete defiance of his entire trust. When he got home that night, Diane was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She glanced up at him with the kind of smile on her face that he now recognized as completely false. "You're back late today." Some paperwork to take care of," he said perfunctorily, walking towards the fridge to pull out a beer. He wanted to question her on the spot, to throw those emails in her face and see how she would explain. But another voice sounded in his head, a calmer, more calculated voice. "Why are you in such a hurry? Why don't you plan it properly?" Years of experience as a financial officer have taught him that any major decision needs to be well thought out. Why act in a fit of rage and give her time to prepare? No, he needed a plan, a perfect plan to make sure that when he made his move, she was completely defenseless. That night, Diane went to bed as usual, oblivious to his impending action. Robert stayed up late in the den and started making plans. If Diane wants to take half of his property in the divorce, she's going to be disappointed. Very disappointing. She wants to wait until the end of the year to file for divorce, he said to himself. Then I'll give her a big surprise. His plan began to take shape. It's not just about protecting his assets. It's about revenge, about making Diane pay for her betrayal. When she finally realizes that Robert has disappeared, taking all the money with him and leaving her with nothing, she'll realize what a mistake she's made. Robert smiled, picturing Diane's desperate expression. It would be the perfect revenge. For the next 3 months, Robert lived a double life. On the surface, he's the same workaholic husband he's always been, always leaving early and staying late, indifferent to family life. But behind the scenes, he was carefully preparing his disappearance. First, there's the money. As the company's CFO, Robert knows how to hide the flow of money. He began transferring some of his winnings and earnings to a secret account, which was opened under a different identity. Acquiring this new identity was more difficult than he expected. He needs to find a professional, someone who can create perfectly legal documents, driver's licenses, social security numbers, birth certificates, all real documents that just belong to someone who doesn't exist, the Alan Parker. He got in touch with someone who specialized in this type of work through a former colleague. In a secluded cafe, Robert meets Steve, a man who calls himself a technical advisor. "It's not cheap," Steve warned, whispering from the corner of the cafe. "And I need to know you're not going to do anything illegal with this." "I just want a fresh start," Robert replies, which isn't exactly a lie. "I'm tired of my current life and want to disappear and start a new one." Steve studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I understand. Divorce issues." Robert didn't answer, but his expression said it all. "I need $50,000, all cash," Steve said. "Half in advance and half upon receipt of documents. Don't ask me for details, and I won't tell you. In 2 weeks, you'll get a package with everything you need." Robert pulled an envelope from his briefcase containing $25,000 in cash. "It's ready to go." Steve took the envelope without examining the contents. 2 weeks from now, same time, same place. Robert then began to transfer funds. He already had a private investment account, which Diane didn't know about. Now, he began transferring more money into this account, and then to a new account in Alan Parker's name. He was careful not to transfer more than $10,000 at a time to avoid triggering the bank's automated reporting system. As the CFO of the company, he knows how to operate these things without drawing attention to them. At his company, he told the finance department that his bonus would be deferred until next year to minimize his tax liability for that year. In fact, he had arranged for the prize money to be transferred directly into his secret account. He also contacted a realtor in Colorado to purchase a cabin away from the city in Alan Parker's name. It was an all-cash transaction that left no traceable records. He viewed the property via video call and nodded in satisfaction. It would be his new home, away from Chicago, away from Diane and their life together. At the same time, he began to learn a new skill, carpentry. Every weekend, when he tells Diane he's going golfing or to a business meeting, he's actually going to a woodworking studio outside of town to learn basic skills under a retired carpenter. He found he had a natural inclination towards this craft and was soon producing simple but beautiful items. "You have a gift," the old carpenter told him. "You have a steady hand. You have a good eye. That's important in woodworking." Robert smiled, feeling a long overdue sense of satisfaction. In finance, he never had the opportunity to create physical items and see the fruits of his labor. Carpentry gave him a new sense of fulfillment, a satisfaction he had never experienced in the corporate world. He still needs evidence. The evidence was not only to confirm his suspicions, but to strengthen his resolve for revenge. He contacts another private investigator and asks him to keep an eye on Diane and James. "I need hard evidence," he told the detective. "Photos, videos, anything that proves they had an affair." The private investigator nodded. "Normally, I would advise you to talk to your wife directly, but I have a feeling you've already made your decision." "Yes," Robert confirmed. "I just need proof." A week later, the private investigator brought in a flash drive containing dozens of photos and several videos that clearly documented Diane's rendezvous with James. There are photos of them dining intimately at a restaurant, photos of them cuddling in a hotel lobby, and even a video of them holding hands and walking by a lake. What angered Robert the most was that there were several photos showing them in his and Diane's home, in their bedroom. Seeing another man fondling his wife in his bed made Robert feel a sharp wave of nausea and anger. "Do you want to continue the investigation?" the detective asked, noting the change in Robert's expression. "No, these are enough," Robert replied, his voice tight. "But there's one more thing I need you to do." He details his plan. When he disappears, he wants the detective to deliver copies of all the evidence to Diane, as well as to James' wife, Sarah. "Are you sure you want to do this?" the detective asked. "It will completely ruin their lives." "They ruined my life," Robert replied coldly. "I'm just returning the favor." Then he started cleaning up their joint accounts. He moved the funds slowly and carefully, making sure each time that the amount would not attract Diane's attention. He paid Emma's entire college tuition, citing a desire to help her eliminate the burden of student loans. Diane had no problem with that. After all, as far as she was concerned, the money would eventually be part of hers. He also remortgaged their home and, through a complex legal process, ensured that most of the home equity was withdrawn and transferred to his secret account. When Diane finally finds out, she'll be facing a huge mortgage and little to no equity in her home. Robert is careful to maintain normality. He joins Diane at social events, exchanges pleasantries with her coworkers, including James, and acts as if everything is normal. He even buys Diane an expensive diamond necklace for Christmas, to which she reacts with nothing more than a polite thank you, and then continues to text with James. In the process, Robert begins to notice more details, those clues he missed before, like how Diane always places her cell phone screen face down, or how she's suddenly interested in working out, or how she buys new lingerie but never wears it in front of him. All these little details were now becoming so obvious that he wondered how he'd overlooked them before. "I'm such a fool," he said to himself one night, looking at Diane's sleeping form in bed. But soon, you'll realize who the real fool is. There was only one thing he felt guilty about: Emma. His daughter is the only real part of his life, and he doesn't want to hurt her. But he also knew that if he told her the truth, she would be put in an impossible position, choosing which side to take, her father or her mother. Robert doesn't want to put her under that kind of pressure. Eventually, a week before he plans to disappear, Robert asks Emma out for dinner. They meet at her favorite Italian restaurant, and Emma is clearly surprised that he initiated the invitation. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, looking him in the eye. "You look. It's not the same." Robert smiled and tried to keep his tone light. "I'm fine, honey. Just wanted to see you. How are you doing in school?" They talked about her classes, her friends, and her plans for the future. Emma has recently excelled in school and has received offers from several top graduate programs. "I'd probably go with that program in Boston," she said excitedly. "Their field of study is exactly what I'm interested in." "That's great, honey," Robert said sincerely. "I'm proud of you. You always know what you want and work for it." Then, near the end of dinner, Robert took an envelope out of his pocket. "This is for you," he said, "but I want you to promise me something." Emma looked at him confused. "What is it? Don't open it now. Wait until next Friday night. By then, you'll understand." Emma took the envelope and frowned. "Dad, you're scaring me." "What is it?" "Just something you need to know. But not now. Promise me, okay?" Eventually, she nodded. "Okay, I promise. But are you sure you're okay?" "I've never been more certain," he replied, a flicker of determination in his eyes. That was the last time he saw Emma. Inside the envelope was a letter explaining Diane's betrayal and why he had to leave. There was also a bank card, linked to an account that only she could access, that contained enough money to pay for her graduate studies and the years of her life afterward. Most importantly, there was a secure email address through which she could contact him, but only if she promised not to tell Diane. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "Dear Emma, forgive me for leaving the way I did, but I had no choice. I can't continue to put up with this betrayal and lies. I love you always. Whatever happens, remember this. You will always be the most important person in my life. But I can't continue to live in a family built on lies. Your mother made her choice, and now I've made mine. I hope one day you understand that sometimes walking away is the only way out. Love always, Dad." On the day of the disappearance, everything went according to plan. Friday morning, Robert left for work as usual. Dressed in his favorite suit with a briefcase, he kissed Diane on the cheek, the only remaining act of intimacy between them. "Don't wait for me at night," he said. "Board meetings can drag on late." Diane nodded, barely glancing up at him. She was busy texting on her phone. "Okay, take care on the road." That was their last conversation. Arriving at the office, Robert finished the final preparations. He sent an email to the company's CEO stating that he was resigning for personal reasons, effective immediately. He knew the CEO would be shocked, but he didn't care. He had been working for the company for 15 years and had never let them down. They'll find a replacement. Then he deleted all the personal files on his computer and took the few personal items he had left in his office: a picture of Emma, a pen his father had given him, and his favorite coffee mug. That's all the marks of his career. At noon, he drove to the airport, but not for a flight. He left his limo in the long-term parking lot with the keys in it. He then took a reserve cab to a small storage unit on the outskirts of the city. There, he changed out of his suit and into jeans and a plaid shirt, shaved off his well-trimmed beard, leaving behind a bushy mustache, and put on his glasses. The man in the mirror is no longer Robert Mitchell, but Alan Parker, an ordinary carpenter, an escapee from the big city. He took out the pickup truck he had prepared in advance, a Ford F-150 that looked a little old but was in good shape. He put his bags in the back of the car, and began the long journey to his new home in Colorado. On the way, he made one last call. Using a disposable cell phone, he contacted the private investigator. "Is everything ready?" Robert asked. "Yes, sir," the detective replied. "The evidence packet is ready and will be delivered tomorrow. The time is just what you said, 7 p.m. She'll be home. James' wife will receive a copy as well." "Very good. Remember, it's over when it's delivered. All contact between us ends here." "Understood, sir. Good luck." Robert hangs up and throws his cell phone out the window. From now on, Robert Mitchell no longer exists. Just Alan Parker in his pickup truck, headed for a new life in the Rockies. While driving, he thinks back to his marriage to Diane. It all started out great. They are young, passionate, and full of hope for the future. Then Emma is born, and their lives become more complicated. He started working longer hours in order to provide a better life for his family. And Diane grows cold, no longer showing appreciation for his efforts. When did it start to go bad, he wondered. Was it the time he worked too much? Were those the days when Diane felt neglected? Or were the seeds of marital failure planted much earlier, when they were young? But none of that matters anymore. His marriage is over, his old life is over. Right now, all he cares about is the future and his new life as Alan Parker. The next night, when Diane received the thick envelope, her world fell apart. Inside were dozens of photos that clearly documented every one of her rendezvous with James, and printouts of all her cheating emails. To top it off, there was a letter from Robert. "Diane, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't bother looking for me. You won't make it. I've known about you and James for a while. Actually, I know a lot more than you think. You planned to file for divorce at the right time in order to take half of my property. Now I've made that decision for you. But unfortunately, you won't get any. Our joint account is empty. There are 2 mortgages on the house, and the one you don't know about happens to equal the full value of the house. My retirement account. It's gone too. I left Emma enough money to finish school and start her life. She doesn't have to pay for our failures. As for James, his wife has now received a similar package. I'm sure you two can comfort each other, if he's still willing to see you. After all, your value has plummeted, hasn't it? Without my money, without that beach house you've always wanted, what's your attraction to him? I'm guessing you're feeling panicky right now, thinking about how to find me and how to get back the money you think belongs to you. Save your strength. I've disappeared, more completely than you can imagine. Good luck, Diane. You're gonna need it." Robert. Over the next few days, Diane's life completely falls apart. James' wife, Sarah, kicked him out of the house as soon as she received the evidence and contacted the board of directors of the nonprofit organization where they worked. Organizations can't afford this kind of scandal, especially when they are in the midst of a major fundraising campaign. James was summarily dismissed. When Diane tries to contact him, James refuses her calls. Eventually, he told her via text message, "It was all a mistake. I can't lose my family. Please don't contact me again." Diane tries to contact the bank, but realizes that Robert is telling the truth. Their financial situation is much worse than she thought. The joint account was almost emptied, leaving only a few $1,000s. The house was burdened with 2 huge mortgages, and the monthly payments almost equaled her entire monthly paycheck. Robert's retirement accounts have been emptied and his investment accounts have disappeared. She hires a private investigator to try to find Robert, but comes up empty-handed. It's like he disappeared off the face of the earth. There was nothing the police could do. After all, he had left voluntarily and had committed no legal wrong. Most painfully, Emma refuses to communicate with her. When Diane tried to contact her, Emma only returned a short text message. "I know everything. I need time. Please don't contact me." Diane's friends, too, have distanced themselves from her once they learned of her cheating. People in the community started whispering and pointing. The social status she had been so carefully maintaining crumbled instantly. In a matter of weeks, Diane went from being a respected community member and happily married wife to a lonely, broke, and discredited woman. She had to sell many items in her home to pay the bills, including the diamond necklace Robert had given her. When she finally realized she couldn't afford the mortgage on her house, she was forced to list it for sale. But due to the downturn in the market and the burden of her mortgage, she barely gained anything from it. Eventually, she moved into a small apartment and began looking for a new job. But in the current economy, it's not easy for a woman in her 50s without much real work experience to find a job. She eventually found a part-time job at a retail store that paid a fraction of what she was making at the nonprofit. Each night, as she lay alone in bed, Diane remembered the words of Robert's letter. "You're going to need good luck." Now she understood that he was telling the truth. She needed good luck, but it seemed to have left her forever. All of this could have been avoided if she hadn't cheated on Robert, if she had been content with what she had instead of always wanting more, if she had cherished her marriage instead of taking it for granted. But it's too late for that now. Her choices have led to her destruction, and she is left to suffer the consequences alone. Meanwhile, in a small town in Colorado, Alan Parker begins his new life. The pickup truck traveled along winding mountain roads surrounded by magnificent mountains and dense pine forests. He smiled when he saw the sign, "Welcome to Priceville." It's a new beginning, a new life free of betrayal and lies. Alan Parker quickly gained a foothold in the small town of Priceville, Colorado. This town of only 5,000 people was exactly what he needed. Small enough to feel safe, but not too small to be noticeable. The cabin he purchased for cash is located just outside of town, surrounded by pine trees, and has a creek running through the backyard. From his balcony, he could see the mountains in the distance, the morning mist shrouding the peaks as if they were a living painting. The locals have a friendly but cautious attitude towards newcomers. Alan knew that a sudden stranger in a town like this might arouse suspicion, so he carefully constructed his backstory. He's an ex-financial analyst from Chicago who got tired of the stresses of city life and decided to follow his passion and become a carpenter. The story is close enough to the truth to allow him to tell it naturally, but vague enough not to cause people to dig deeper. He began buying tools and materials at the local hardware store and soon built a simple studio next to his cabin. At first, his work was crude, but as his skills improved, he began to produce increasingly beautiful furniture and decorative items. The first order came from Mike, a cafe owner in town. He needs some new tables and chairs to expand his outdoor seating area. "I heard you were a carpenter," Mike said when he first came to Alan's studio. "Can we talk about the price?" Alan showed off some of his work, and Mike looked pleased with it. "These look good. Can you complete 6 sets of tables and chairs in 2 weeks?" "Yes," Alan replied, though he wasn't sure he could fulfill such a large order on time. But he needs to build a reputation, and he likes a challenge. For the next 2 weeks, Alan worked almost nonstop, honing his skills and perfecting every detail. When he finally delivered the finished products to the cafe, Mike was amazed at their quality. "This is much better than I expected," he said appreciatively. "You're a true craftsman, Alan." This successful project earned Alan a good reputation, and soon other townspeople began commissioning him to make furniture and repair items. He has a natural talent for it, and years of experience working with precise numbers at the company have helped him do well in woodworking. His attention to detail, his quest for perfection, these are all qualities he brings from his former career that are now at work in his new field. An elderly woman in town named Linda gave him a particularly meaningful project. She wanted a wooden keepsake box to hold some of her late husband's belongings. "He was a man who liked to fish," she told Alan. "I wanted a box that would reflect his passion." Alan spent a week meticulously carving a box with fine designs of fish and rivers. When Linda saw the finished product, her eyes moistened. "It's perfect," she whispered. "He'll love it." Moments like this gave Alan a new sense of fulfillment. As CFO in Chicago, his job, while well compensated, often felt abstract and intangible. Now, every piece he creates is tangible and gives a real emotional response. It was a sense of accomplishment he had never experienced before. The locals also began to accept Alan as a member of the community. He often has a beer in the town pub and occasionally chats with others. He becomes a quiet but friendly presence, never revealing too much about his past, but not so much as to seem mysterious. From Chicago, he would introduce himself, had enough of the big city life, and wanted some fresh air. That's all anyone needs to know. Over time, Alan begins to get to know the various characters in town. There's Mike, the owner of the cafe, who always knows the latest gossip in town. There's Tom, the owner of the bar, a quiet but observant man. There are young couples Jen and Alex, who run a small organic farm in town. Then there's Martha, the mayor, an energetic 60-something woman who seems to know everything that's going on in town. In his last years with Diane, Robert felt suffocated and trapped. And as Alan, he felt freer than ever. There are no meetings to attend, no deadlines to meet, no betrayals to worry about. Just wood, tools, and his own thoughts. Of course, there are lonely times. There were nights when he would stare at his phone, trying to email Emma. But he knew it was too risky. At least not yet. He needed to make sure Diane couldn't track him. He also thinks about Diane and James and their betrayal. Whenever such thoughts arise, he returns to the studio and transforms his anger and pain into creative energy. Some of his best work was created during these emotionally charged moments. One day, while he is in his studio, Martha, the mayor of the town, visits. "I've heard you're a very talented carpenter," she said, looking around the studio and admiring his work. "There's an arts festival going on in town, and I'd like to invite you to it. You can display and sell your work. It's a great publicity opportunity." Alan hesitated. He wasn't sure he wanted that kind of exposure. But on the other hand, it could be a great opportunity to increase your income. Eventually, he agreed. On the day of the festival, Alan showed off some of his best work: an elaborately carved bookshelf, a couple of decorative boxes, and some tiny wooden animal statues. To his surprise, his work has attracted great attention. By the end of the festival, he had sold almost all of his exhibits and received several new orders. "Looks like you found your market," Martha told him, watching him count his money. "People love your work." As the business grew, Alan began to think about expanding the studio. He purchased more tools and hired a young man, Jake, as an assistant. Jake is a local guy, in his early 20s, with a natural passion for woodworking but a lack of formal training. Alan found himself enjoying teaching this young man and watching his skills grow. "You taught me a lot better than my high school carpentry teacher," Jake told him one day. "He only knows how to make simple birdhouses." Alan laughed. "I'm in the learning process too. Every piece of wood teaches me something new." As the months turn into years, Alan's life settles down. He has a steady income, a comfortable home, and a community that accepts him. He even started attending local events, community barbecues, charity auctions, and even township meetings. He still keeps a low profile, but is no longer a complete outsider. His contact with Emma is very limited. They communicate using an encrypted mail service and never mention a specific location. He knew she had recovered from her initial shock and anger, but she was still hurt, not only by her father's sudden departure, but also by the discovery of her mother's betrayal. "I don't hate you, Dad," she wrote in an email, "but I wish you'd handled this in a different way. Mom's a mess right now." Robert almost replied that Diane should be held accountable for her actions, which was exactly the outcome he wanted. But he suppressed the urge. Emma doesn't need to get caught up in a war between her parents. Instead, he simply replied that he loved her and wanted her to focus on her studies and her own future. As time goes on, he learns that Diane's life is becoming more and more difficult. The house was repossessed by the bank, and she had to move to a small apartment. As a result of the scandal, she lost her job at a nonprofit organization and now works part-time at a retail store, barely making ends meet. James and his wife divorced, but he didn't stay with Diane. Instead, he moved to another state to start a new life, cutting off contact with Diane completely. Robert felt a deep sense of fulfillment for this. That's exactly what he wants, not only to protect his assets, but to make Diane pay for her betrayal. Seeing her lose everything, just as she had tried to make him lose everything, was a sweeter feeling than he could have ever imagined. His only regret is Emma. He knew it was painful for her to be caught between her parents, but he was sure that in time she would realize that he had made the right decision. He didn't choose to forgive and forget. He chose revenge and rebirth. One night, while Alan is having a beer at the bar, he notices a stranger walk in. This is not common in Priceville. The town has very few out-of-town visitors, especially outside of the tourist season. The stranger looked around, then came straight toward Alan. That's why, when the man who called himself Marcus Reynolds sat down next to him, Robert was immediately alerted. He had been living in Priceville for 2 years and 4 months and had adapted to the quiet pace of life. He's not ready to give it up. "Take you home," Robert sneered. "Where's home, Marcus? Do you feel like being in Chicago, in the house I used to live in? That house has been repossessed by the bank. Or around my once wife, the woman who betrayed me? Please tell me where the hell is my home." Marcus looks a little uneasy as he looks around, as if he's worried someone might overhear them. There weren't many people in the bar. A few locals were playing pool, Tom was polishing glasses, and no one was interested in their conversation. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand how you feel. Marcus lowered his voice. But I was paid to find you, and I have. It's my job to get you back to Chicago. Who hired you? Robert asked, even though he already knew the answer. There's only one person who would do that. I can't give out client information, Marcus replied, but his eyes gave away the truth. It's Diane, isn't it? Robert shook his head with a smile devoid of warmth. What else does she want from me? I've got nothing left. Marcus looks a little hesitant. Mrs. Diane Mitchell is indeed my client. So what does she want now? Robert asked. Money? Money in my retirement account? Or does she just want to know where I am so she can make my life a living hell again? Mr. Mitchell, I don't know the specifics. All I know is that she wants to find you. Why? Robert pursued. Tell me, Marcus. I need to know her intentions. Marcus hesitated, then sighed. Mrs. Mitchell is not doing well. When the house was repossessed, she had to move to a small apartment. She lost her job and now works part-time at a retail store. She would like some financial support. Robert burst out laughing, a laugh that had no hint of humor in it, only cold sarcasm. Economic support? She betrayed me with plans to buy a beach house with her lover with my money, and now she wants my financial support. He shook his head in disbelief at Diane's chutzpah. Tell me, Marcus, do you know why she's in this situation? Marcus didn't answer, but the look on his face told Robert that he more or less knew the story. Let me guess, Robert continued. She didn't tell you about her cheating, did she? Didn't tell you how she and her lover James planned to get a divorce in due time and take half of my fortune? Marcus' silence confirms Robert's suspicions. So what are you going to do? Robert asked, leaning back against the bar. Forcing me to go back at gunpoint. Kidnap me? I'm pretty sure that's illegal. Marcus' face reddened. Of course not. I was just asked to find you and contact my client. What's next? That's between you. Robert studied Marcus' expression and pondered his options. This man had found him, which meant his hiding was no longer safe. If Marcus can find him, so can everyone else. He needs to make a decision. So you haven't told Diane you found me? Marcus hesitated. Not yet. I want to confirm your identity before I contact her. Wise decision, Robert said, lifting his glass and taking a sip of whiskey. Let me tell you a story, Marcus. Then you can decide if you really want to tell Diane where I am. He begins to tell his story, how he found out about Diane's betrayal, how he learned that she only wanted his money, and how he orchestrated his disappearance. He describes Diane and James' affair, how they rendezvoused in his and Diane's bed, and how they mocked his work hours and neglect of his family. You know what's ironic? Robert laughed bitterly. I worked so hard for her, to make sure she and Emma have a comfortable life. And she betrayed me with this. He describes his plans in detail, how to get a new identity, how to transfer money, how to buy a new house, how to learn carpentry. It's not just about the money, he said. It's about justice. She intends to take everything from me, my possessions, my dignity, even my daughter. That's why I decided to make the first move. Marcus listened quietly, his expression gradually changing from professional indifference to something approaching sympathy. Marcus shook his head when Robert told how he'd found out that Diane planned to get a divorce in due course to get the biggest share of the property. A lot of people do that, he whispered. Maybe, Robert admitted. But that doesn't mean I'm going to sit back and do nothing. So I left, taking everything I could. Money in a bank account? Turn away. The house. Make sure it's in debt. My retirement account. It's gone too. I only left Emma with enough money to finish school and start her life. How is she? Marcus asked. Your daughter, I mean. Robert's expression softened a bit. She's fine. Just graduated from college and now working for a company in Boston. We occasionally connect via encrypted email. What about Diane? Robert shrugged. As far as I know, she's not doing too well. The house is gone, the job is gone, the reputation is gone. But these are the results of her own choices. So you're Alan Parker now, Marcus concluded. Carpenter, lived in Priceville and led a simple life. Exactly, Robert, now Alan, confirmed. I'm happy, Marcus. Happier than I've been in the last 20 years. Why do I have to go back? For what? Marcus was silent for a moment, looking down at his glass. Mr. Mitchell or Mr. Parker, if you prefer that name, I can't say I fully understand why you left. But I understand why you don't want to go back. Alan, keep an eye on him. So what are you going to do? It depends on what you offer, Marcus replied calmly. I'm a businessman. I was hired to find you. I found you. But my client didn't pay me the full fee up front, only half. How much do you want to forget you found me? Alan asked bluntly. Marcus smiled and shook his head. That's not true, Mr. Parker. I have a work ethic. I'm not going to lie and say I didn't find you. So what do you want? Let me tell her I found you, Marcus said. But I can say you've built a new life and don't want to be disturbed. I can convince her to give up and accept reality. This way I get the job done, get my money, and don't ruin your new life. Alan considered it for a moment. Why should I trust you? Because I am not your enemy, Marcus replied. I'm just doing my job. And frankly, after hearing your story, I don't want to ruin the new life you've worked so hard to build. Alan doesn't entirely trust him, but he does understand that his options are limited. If Marcus does decide to tell Diane exactly where he is, he will have to run away again and rebuild his life once more. He had established roots in Priceville and didn't want to lose it all again. Okay, he finally agreed. But I want you to promise me something. What is it? When you tell Diane you found me, give her this. Alan pulled a folded note from his wallet and handed it to Marcus. It can only be given to her if she agrees to give up tracking me down. Marcus took the note, but didn't open it. What is it? A message, Alan said. A truth she needs to understand. Marcus nodded and put the note in his pocket. One more thing, Mr. Parker. What? Your daughter. She doesn't know where her father is, but she's worried about you. I think she has a right to know you're safe and healthy. Alan considered the request. He's desperate to see Emma, but he's worried it might lead to Diane finding out where he is. Can you promise not to tell Emma exactly where I am? I could just tell her you're fine and living a happy life. Alan nodded. Okay, I'll take it. They talked for a while longer, discussing specifics. Finally, Marcus stood up. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Parker. I'll do what we agreed. Alan watched him leave, his mind filled with conflicting emotions. On the one hand, he feared Marcus would betray his trust. On the other, he felt a strange release knowing that his story had finally been heard. 2 weeks later, Alan was finishing up a custom bookshelf in his studio when he heard a knock at the door. He put down his tools, wiped the wood shavings from his hands, and walked toward the door. Outside the door stands Emma. He stood there in shock, unable to believe his eyes. She looked more mature than he remembered, stronger, but undoubtedly his daughter. Emma, he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. How did you? Marcus told me, she said, tears glistening in her eyes. He found me, not Mom. Alan looked at her in shock. What? He was never going to tell Mom, Emma explained. He looked me up and realized I was the only family he could find. He thinks I have a right to know where you are. Alan shook his head, unsure how to react. He cheated on me. He said he'd tell Diane. He lied, Emma said, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. Just like you lied about your disappearance. Alan stood there, momentarily speechless. Finally, he held out his arms, and Emma immediately jumped into his embrace. They hugged each other tightly, years of separation dissolving into nothingness in this moment. I'm so sorry, he whispered in her hair. I'm sorry I left like that. I can see why, Emma said, withdrawing from the hug and wiping away tears. I read your letter. I witnessed what my mom looked like afterward. I can't say I agree with what you're doing, but I understand. He invited her inside and made her a cup of tea. They sat on the balcony, looking at the mountains in the distance and talking about the events of the last 2 years or so. Emma tells him she moved to Boston after graduation and got a job at an environmental company. She loves the job, but sometimes feels lonely, especially when she knows her father is alive but doesn't know where he is. Every time I get an email from you, I'm happy, she said. But I always wondered where you were and how you were doing. Alan nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. I'd tell you, but I'm afraid Diane would find out. How's Mom? Eventually, Alan asked. Emma's expression turned serious. Not so good. She lost almost everything. House, job, friends. She works at a coffee shop now and lives in a small apartment. Alan nodded, feeling a mixture of emotions. On the one hand, it was exactly the outcome he wanted. On the other, seeing the pain in Emma's eyes, he felt a twinge of doubt. Had his revenge hurt the person he loved most? Where's James? He divorced his wife and moved to Arizona. He's not with his mom. In fact, they haven't been in touch since that incident. He didn't even respond to Mom's calls or messages. Alan wasn't sure how to respond. On the one hand, He feels a strong sense of satisfaction knowing that James has also paid for his actions. On the other hand, he realizes that this kind of vengeance brings no real pleasure to anyone. Is she still looking for you? Emma nods. Yeah, she's been looking for you. She hired a couple of private investigators, but nothing came of it. Until Marcus. Why does she want me? Alan asked. Is it for the money? That's partly why, Emma admitted. She's struggling financially, but I think she really regrets it too. She has told me many times that she made a terrible mistake and that if she could do it all over again, she would make different choices. Alan grunted. It's too late. I know, Emma said softly. I'm not asking you to forgive her. I just wanted to let you know how she's doing. They continued to chat until the sun began to sink in the west. Emma told him about her job in Boston, her friends, her life. Alan tells her about his woodworking, about the town, about how he's found a new kind of peace. Will you stay? Finally, he asked. Even if it's just for a few days? Emma smiled. I took a week's vacation. I'd like to learn more about my father's new life, if you don't mind. That week was the happiest Alan had been since he left Chicago. He takes Emma on hikes, shows her his favorite spots, and introduces her to friends in town. He taught her basic woodworking skills, and together they made a small wooden box, a souvenir she could take back to Boston. Emma quickly fell in love with Priceville and Alan's lifestyle. She marveled at the friendly atmosphere of the town and the natural beauty of the surroundings. It's much nicer than I thought it would be, she told Alan after a hike. I understand why you chose to stay here. Alan smiled. This place has given me a second chance. A chance to start over. They had many good times and made up for lost time. Alan showed Emma all his pieces, proudly telling the story of each one. Emma was amazed at his skill and creativity. I never knew you had such talent, she said. In Chicago, you're always so busy with work that you rarely have time for that. Alan sighed. That's one of my biggest regrets. I spent too much time working and not enough time discovering what my true passion was. On the last night, they sat on the balcony and looked at the star-filled sky. You know, Emma said suddenly, I never really hated the way you left. I did get angry, I did get sad, but I never hated you. Alan looked at her and felt his heart fill with love and pride. Thank you, Emma. It means a lot to me. But there's one thing I don't understand, she continued. The note you gave Marcus. He gave it to me, not Mom, as you requested. What does it say? Alan was silent for a moment, recalling the words he had written down. There are some mistakes that can't be mended, some betrayals that can't be forgiven. I have found new happiness, and I hope you can move on as well. That's what I wrote. Emma pondered the words. Is this a message for Mom? Yes, Alan affirmed. I hope she understands that I'm gone and won't be back. Her betrayal destroyed our marriage, and my leaving was my response to her betrayal. I found happiness in my new life, and she had to learn to get back on her feet after losing everything. Emma nodded, though her expression was a little sad. Do you think she can get back on her feet? I don't know, Alan replied honestly. It's up to her, but I don't care anymore. All I care about is my new life, and you. They were silent for a while, looking at the stars. Will you tell Mom I'm here? Finally, Alan asked, a hint of concern in his voice. Emma shook her head. No, I won't tell her. I understand why you don't want her to know where you are. Thank you, Alan said, taking his daughter's hand. I'll take you to the airport tomorrow. I'll be back, she promised. Maybe Christmas. I'll be waiting for you, he replied, tears in his eyes. This will always be your home, no matter when. The next day, Alan drove Emma to the nearest airport. Before saying goodbye, she gave him a tight hug. I'll be back, she promised again. Maybe next month? I have some vacation time available. I'll wait for you, he replied. This will always be your home, no matter when. She got on the plane, and Alan drove back to Priceville. As he came to the outskirts of the town, he stopped the car and looked at the mountains in the distance. The sun was setting, the golden rays illuminating the peaks and coloring the sky orange-red. Once again, he felt that deep sense of fulfillment. Diane has lost everything: her home, her job, her reputation, her lover. She is now living a difficult life, alone and abandoned by society. It was exactly the result he wanted. For someone like Diane, money and social status are everything. Losing that would be the harshest punishment for her. And, most importantly, she would never know where he was, never control his life again. He was completely free from her grasp. He doesn't know what the future holds, or if Diane will continue to look for him. But he knew one thing. No matter what happened, he would never go back to the past. Robert Mitchell has disappeared, leaving only Alan Parker and his new life. As he drove back to the cabin, he remembered the vows he'd said at his and Diane's wedding all those years ago. "Till death do us part." Ironically, Robert Mitchell is indeed dead, and Alan Parker is alive and well. He parked his car and walked to the studio. Tomorrow, he's starting a new project, a bookshelf designed especially for Emma to keep in her room when she visits. It would be his most heartfelt work, filled with love for his daughter. Alan picked up a piece of oak and began to conceptualize the design. He ran his fingers over the grain of the wood, feeling its texture. It's a beautiful piece of wood, as full of possibilities as his new life. In the quiet life of Priceville, Alan Parker finds his true self, away from lies and betrayal. And Diane, in some tiny apartment in Chicago, is left to suffer the consequences of her choices alone. This is what revenge tastes like. Sweet, satisfying, and so perfect. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.